Live in my bucolic life, we have a city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and rode the horses in through the barn, and time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful our houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello. So we're going to get started on the second part of the couture skirt, and in this part we're going to be easing the top, the waistband top, so converting darts into easing and everything that goes along with that, and also cutting out the lining, easing the lining, and starting the sandwiching process for that. But before I get started with that, there's one thing that I realized I did wrong in the first video that I need to correct right now. So let me tip the camera down and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is the overlap section, okay? And this is my center front line right here. If you remember when I was making the pattern, I was trying to figure out what to do with the very edge of the overlap. And I ended up, because where I had to end up placing was where a dart was, so I just kind of bent it in. So I went back, re-watched her video just to make sure that this is correct, and it is not. What it's supposed to be is flat all the way up, even if there is a dart underneath there. And I can fix that very easily because this is just basting stitches. This side I already did fix, so you can see here on this side it's angled in, and on this side it is very straight. So the edge of the overlap, even if there's a dart under it, it just comes straight all the way up to meet the waistband line up here. So all I had to do is basically lift off my fusible tape here down to the point where it is level, and pull out some basting stitches, put them back in perfectly straight, and then place this back down and fuse it again. So I've already done that to this side. I'm going to do that to this side now, and then we'll be ready to get started. Okay, so here's one thing. Even when reading her books and watching her videos, a lot of times the whole Claire Shaeffer method, Claire just kind of gives you an idea and leaves it up to you how you're going to interpret it. Okay, it's not a clear-cut A, B, C, D. It's do this. Okay, and with that, one of the instructions was mark out a rectangle where your overlap is going to be. And I have a general idea of how that's going to work, and we'll get to the details of it later. But it was just that much. Mark out a rectangle. I have no dimensions, no nothing like that. And while I was watching her video, I paused the screen when she had a really quick shot of hers, and it looked like her rectangle was slightly shorter, maybe half an inch shorter than where her notch was for the bottom of her zipper, which is something that I marked in red thread over here in the center back. So I'm going with that because I can't find anything that is any clearer. My pattern is marked for a 7-inch zipper, so it's 7 inches down from the stitching line is where that mark is. So I'm going to make my overlap at 6 inches because that is slightly shorter in my mind. So I am on the wrong side here, and if this is my center line, it looked like, and again this is getting into that, it looks like gray area, that the same amount on this side of the center front line is also measured out on this side, is what it looked like. So, and I am going to use my heat erasable pen for these calculations because I can just erase it off, but it's quicker for me just to kind of get an idea this way. So, Claire, if you're watching, I hope that's okay with you. Actually, at one point she mentions for doing something else, oh, you can use chalk or something like that for it. And so I know she's not totally opposed to it. It's just you need to do the thread tracing on top of it. Okay, so if this is my center front, this is overlap. If I make this point over here an overlap part, I need to make the corresponding area on this side also an overlap part. I think that's what I'm going with for right now. If I need to change that later, I will let you know. So my distance on this side is about 5.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 5.5 inches on this side over here. Right about here. And then I will bring this straight up and make that my rectangle. Okay, so that's an equal distance. If this is my center front, I have this side and this side. And I believe that I need to mark that the same on the other piece also. So now that I have this, I'm going to, with my gray yarn, I'm going to mark this also. Right now the only things that I have in red are my quilting lines, and that's so it can be painfully obvious that those are a separate thing. Okay, I just changed my mind and I'm glad I have my mock-up here. The whole point of this cutting out the rectangle is that because this is a wrap, we're going to be cutting out some of the heavy fabric under here, so it's just lining against lining. And if I make, let me pin this back over here. If I make this side, so say this is her center front here, okay? And if I make this side cut out the same width as this side cut out, it's going to be painfully obvious right here. I'm pretty sure that the underneath part, so not the part that's attached to the overlap at the very edge, but the other part, the more that's like inland on the skirt, the part that's wrapping around, I think this needs to be narrower. This part needs to be narrower. So this part here, what did we say, was 5.5 inches from here to here. I'm actually probably only going to make it like 4 inches over here, so it'll be 1.5 inches shorter, and that way when this wrap is here, and I know it's going to be secured, but just to be safe, I think I'm going to give myself a little less room, and I think that will be okay. That's the plan. This is a learn on the fly. So back over here, this is what I had done. I had outlined this so that it's equal, all right? And this is the one that's more inland, you know, the one that's towards the rest of the skirt. This is the one towards the overlap. I'm actually going to change this one and take it in so it's like to this point. At this quilting line is where I'm going to have the cutout for the belly area. So that's my plan. 5.5 inches here, 4 inches here, and then I'm going to do the other one the same way. Okay, so my next step is I need to create a guide that I can use to make sure my waistband is going to end up the right size. So I'm getting my waistband piece from my original pencil skirt pattern. It's the piece from this one, which I am basing this design off of. And I'm going to take some markings from that pattern and put it onto my guide. And I am using this twill tape because it does not stretch. You want something that it, you know, no matter what happens, it's not going to stretch. And I'm going to cut it just a little bit longer than my waistband piece. And let me go get a different pen that will not disappear because I want this to be permanent. So I'm going to use my fine point Sharpie because it will not disappear. And I'm just laying it on top of my pattern piece, but down here where it is near all of the dots and everything for marking. And okay, all right, so that's good. So I'm going to start with the center front. I'm going to make a line right where it is and put CF for center front. Then come along, and on my waistband piece there's a dot where the side seam is. So make sure I have the right one. I'm going to put another line here and then letter S for side. And then come all the way back down. I know it's off camera, but I'm putting a line down here for the center back. And the same thing over here. I'm moving over, catching that mark for the side, and catching the mark for the center back. Okay, so here's my side. This one is center back. Over here, this one is a side, and this is a center back. And you're going to use this a lot, so keep it handy. So my next step is I am cutting 2 pieces of my lining. And for my lining, I am using a Bimber crayon. And I'm cutting my pieces roughly the same size as the big rectangles that the fashion fabric is in. And it was kind of funny. I was, like I said, I was rewatching this section in her videos. And when I'm mentioning it, I'm talking about this. It is the couture skirt. It's the Claire Shaeffer couture sewing skirt. And the video is, there's a little DVD that's included with it. So that's what I'm referring to. Buy on Amazon if you want to. I mean, that's where I got mine. You know, you can find them anywhere. Anywhere they sell fine sewing books, I should say. But anyway, while I was watching that video, I thought that it was really funny because she was saying that she prefers to use silk because silk is easier to use than Bimber crayon. And I was thinking, when have we let ease dissuade us from stepping out into unknown territory? So anyhow, apparently this is more difficult to use than silk, but it's what I have. And I have used it so much that I'm actually kind of familiar with it at this point, so I'm not afraid. But I'm ironing my pieces to get the wrinkles out of it, because the next step is I need to put my dot pattern back on top of it and do some marking, and I want to get all these wrinkles out first so it'll lay nice and smooth. Okay, so this is one of the pieces of lining, and I have my pattern here, and whatever I do here, I'm going to do the opposite side on the next piece of lining. So on this one, my center back is here. The next time I do it, I'll make sure to flip the pattern and put my center back over here. But with that said, the only thing that I am supposed to be marking on the lining is the very top edge. And hang on, let me go to the other side here. So what it looks like she's doing is just marking down where the darts are, maybe ½ an inch or so, and then across the top. And she said to mark it in pencil. So we're doing that, Claire. We're marking it in pencil. And she said that the pencil part will be hidden inside the fabric so it won't be visible. So there you go. So I'm just going to do this all the way across. And I'm not actually going all the way down, just like ½ an inch in, if you can see, just like that. And I'm going to do the whole piece, and making sure over here, this is that one that I have at an angle. I'm just going to straighten it out. And I'm going to do that right now before I forget. I have a grid underneath here so I can see what is straight. So that's helpful. So I can just draw that straight because I've already corrected that on my other fabric. Okay, so I'm going to actually start sewing this time. And what I need to do is run gathering stitches at the very top. And I am actually going to be trimming down my little hairs on all of these markings because I don't want that to get tangled up into my gathering stitches. I'm leaving maybe about 3/8 or 1/4 inch poking up so I can see those whiskers, but they're not going to be so much that I'm going to get in my way. Anyhow, for these gathering stitches, because this is a fairly heavy fabric and under no circumstances do I want my gathering thread to break, I will be using my super thread in my bobbin. If you haven't seen it before, this is, I think it's a fishing line actually, but I've had it forever. It's a very, very super strong thread. So I'd suggest put a super strong thread in your bobbin. And the tension for the needle thread, I'm going to loosen that up just a little bit just to make sure everything is good so that I can pull those bobbin threads nicely. The first row of stitching is going to go right along this top thread tracing, okay? The second row is going to go 1/8 of an inch above it into the seam allowance, this whole area up here. I'm just considering seam allowance for right now. So I'll end up with 2 parallel rows all the way, and you start about 1/2 an inch out here before, this is my center back, you know, so you're going to start about 1/2 an inch in on each side. I would go ahead and run it. And what she said is that if, because this is my center front here and this is my overlap, and she said if your overlap is very narrow, don't gather it. If yours is very wide, do gather it. Mine is like halfway, so I'm going to go ahead and run my gathering stitches all the way across. If I need them, I'll use them. If not, well, at least they're there. So that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do these on both of my fashion fabric pieces and also on the lining pieces. And it's the same thing. You just run the gathering stitches, pretend this top line that we drew on here with the pencil is the tracing line, and that's pretty much what you're going to be following for your first row, and the next row is about 1/8 of an inch up from there. Alright, so I have run my 2 rows of basting stitches, and I actually, after a test, I extended it. Instead of the 3mm size stitch that she had in the book, I did it to 4 because my fabric is so thick. The 3 just did not want to work as well. So if you cannot see where my stitches are on this side, I use the thread that I'm using to sew it on the needle thread, and it blends really well. So I'm glad, because this is a test, because that's the thread I will be using to quilt it, and I can tell right now that since it's invisible here, my quilting stitches will be invisible, so that's good. But I'm going to show you on the back side because it's probably a little bit clearer. Okay, so these are my 2 rows, and they are slightly wide at points, and honestly that's because I couldn't, when I was sewing, I couldn't see where I was, so I was just doing my best to gauge it, but I don't think that that's going to be a problem. Okay, what I need to do is pull my bobbin stitches, which are made out of my super duper thread, and use my little tape gauge that I made to gather this to the right side or size. So first thing is the line that says center back. I'm putting right over here at my edge and lining my center back line up with my basted stitch line. The side seam, this dart here is what took the place of that side seam. So my side is actually right in the middle. So I'm going to pin that right in the middle here. I'm trying to pin it so that the points are down so when I'm gathering I won't stab myself. And then the last point is my center front, and that is this line that's before the overlap. So this is my overlap part. This is my center front line that I marked. So I'm going to place that over here. Okay, so I have it gathered in here. Ran a little figure 8 to secure it on the side. And again, I was trying to keep it fairly flat through the overlap area in the first 3 inches or so. You know, it's a little bit wavy, but that's okay. Most of my gathers are right here. This is my side seam, okay, and my center back. So now what I need to do is go over and press it. And when I'm pressing it, what I'm trying to do is use a lot of steam and to get all the fibers very malleable. Once they are very warm and moist and steamy, then I'm going to come back and press them in, because I'm trying to get the fibers to mold into this shape of being more compressed. Not to get gathers, but to just compress it into as flat as possible right along here. Okay, so I just have a sleeve roll underneath here, and I do have my little pressing block. And so I'm just going to take it a little bit at a time, and I am going to be removing my stay while I do this. I can put it back on as I go to just double check that everything's good. So I'm putting a lot of steam in here. Move that, press it in. If you need to, put the block on and roll that on. And you want to hang it there as long as possible. Technically, you're supposed to keep it there until your fabric is cool and dry, because it absorbs the moisture too. So we're just going to slowly work our way down. And again, the goal is to have this fairly flat on this side. This side up here, I'm not too worried about the ruffly edges, because most of that's going to get cut off anyway when I put the waistband on. But it's this part down here that I'm really concerned about. Well, I have pressed and eased and steamed and patted and everything as much as I can, and I still have some lumpiness here. Excuse me. So in this case, Claire gives us one other option. If this is the case that I cannot gather or ease in all the fullness I need to match up with my guide, on the side seam, and she says only the side seam, you are allowed to make a small dart. So what I'm going to do is pull my gathers out of that space. Now, it's basically, if the blue lines were the original dart, you're allowed to make one that is shorter than the original dart and narrower than the original dart. So this dart looks like it's almost half the width of the original, and maybe a few inches shorter, okay? So if that is the case, I'm going to turn this to the wrong side and just fold in half as if I'm going to pin the dart as is. So putting a pin in at this point and this point. Oh, come on, over here, all right? So that's where my original dart is. And down to this point right here. That's my bottom. Now, if I'm going to make it a few inches shorter, say to here, and narrower, say instead of a 1 inch on each side, about a 1/2 inch on each side. I'm going to go ahead and draw a line right here and make that dart. And that's just going to make it a little bit easier to get this fullness eased in, because I have 1 inch less of space to try to cover. Okay, so now I am pressing this dart flat first to set that seam. And now I sewed it all the way up here. So this is also sewed right here. And now I am supposed to slash it open and press it flat. So I will slash it mostly open. And get a little ham to put under there, because I have a round hip, or she has a round hip, I should say, and so we want it to be rounded on there. Getting my little yarn needle with eye, and I'm going to stick it in here. I'm actually sticking the eye in the bottom because it's thicker, just to kind of press it open a little bit and get this started. And now I'm just going to pull it out of the way and finish pressing it. So now this is my side. I have everything removed. I'm going to press it one more time. Okay, so let me get my measuring tape, and we're just going to make sure that we're going to still be able to make all of this fit with our easing. So I just taped my stay back on here, my measuring guide, and now I can see I have more room that I can spread these gathers out in the back. And I think that that is going to make the difference so that I can get a much smoother seam line. So very happy about that. And I'll be doing this whole thing on the other piece because there are 2 pieces for each skirt. Hello and welcome back. It has actually been a couple days since I was working on this. My daughter came to visit after a little hand surgery, so we got to spend some time together. Now I am back on this. So I have my main fashion fabric eased and pressed as well as I can. This is a very, very thick fabric, so I'm hoping that all of this ease, this is the wrong side, I'm hoping that all of this ease is going to work itself out once I put the waistband on and really press it full. But what I have to do now is I have run gathering stitches on my lining, and this is the lining that matches this piece. So what I need to do is stack them matching my upper lines. Remember, I drew it with a pencil up here. Actually, I probably should have matched them before I gathered it so much, so it's easier to see. So I'm going to do that right now. So this little edge mark is matching. Excuse me. This little edge mark is matching with my center back, which is right here. And I'm not really sure that I like this whole method of the matching and everything like this. It seems a little wonky, but we're going to go with it. I think that the best way for me to match is actually stick a pin through the different marks. I think that'll work out better. So like on here, I'm going to stick a pin right here where this little upward mark is. You can see I went a little up and over, and that's matching that lap part. So I'm just going to stick that exact same pin up here, oops, into my fashion fabric so that I know that that's going to line up exactly. I think that's going to be the best way. And like I said, next piece I will match these up before I pull these gathering stitches, because I think I'll be able to see them better. Okay, so with everything pinned together, there's a couple things I want to point out. First, when I pulled out my dart marking stitches where my side seam is, probably leave those in until after you're done with this step, because that way you can match these 2 marks easier. But with all that, I think, this is my opinion, that there's an easier way. If I was ever to do this again, instead of doing it with 2 separate layers like this, and then trying to match up these separate layers and everything like that, and running 2 separate sets of gathering stitches, I will do all of my markings, and while this piece is still flat, put this piece on it, you know, pin it together really nicely or something up here, and run the 2 rows of gathering stitches with them both together. I think that this is actually going to cause a little more trouble than it needs to be. But, you know, this is my first run through, so I just wanted to give you my impressions of the situation so far. So what I've got is, as I'm gathering my lining, I am attaching it to the gathering stitches, right on top of the gathering stitches of my fashion fabric. Once I have it all flat on top of each other, I'm going to come back with a needle and thread and hand baste it right between these two gathering stitches to keep these two layers together. So I've pulled my gathering stitches. I'm just going to kind of call that good, and as I start, I will just double check with each step I take and each stitch I make to make sure that I have it as flat as possible. All right, so I have it all basted and I lightly pressed it. I'll show you that in a minute. But right now I am going back and I am pulling out these extra little thread marks that I put at the top of each dart. She wanted the top of the darts marked, and I can't imagine that I need them beyond this point, so just to keep it from having to get tangled and get in the way of any further stitching, I'm just going through and pulling them out, because the longer they're there, the more chances there's going to be for them to get wrapped up in some other threads. So just like these kind of are right here. So I'm just going to snip those off, and all of my little thread marks that are marking the bottoms of my darts also, because I still have my tracing lines here. So anyhow, this is the wrong side here. Okay, so I have the two gathered, and I have them basted. You can see those big long basting stitches. That is basting the gathering line of the one right on top of the other one. Okay, and you can see right here the most gathering stitches is over where that side seam is, because that's where the most bulk is being condensed, is around this side seam. So that's why I put most of the gathering stitches. So that's it on this for right now. I need to do the other piece exactly the same and finish pulling out all these extra little threads. I think if I can just clean up some of these markings before I start quilting, it's gonna be better for me. Okay, so this is the other side. It might be easier to see what I'm talking about because this side has not been gathered yet. So here is my mark. My overlap front piece is here, my back piece is here. So this is my center back, and I'm gonna match that mark up here and just pull it straight down. The next mark, because remember I just drew with a pencil up here, this is the first side of my first back dart, which is right here. So I'm just going to match that up, and I'm just going to go along that way where I take, so this is my second mark of my first back dart, and I can see that's over here now. So I'm going to put it right there. Okay, so that's how I'm matching them up, going straight across. The center of this dart here that I cut open, I'm putting at the center of these two marks where my side dart was. And then I'll just adjust from there. Okay, so now that I have these parts up here, eased, gathered, basted together, okay, what I need to do is start to prepare it so that I can do these quilting marks. So the first thing she wants you to do is put pins in between the quilting lines. And let's see here. She wants you to put the pins sideways. So I will do that. And I think that I'm going to place them probably about every 6 inches or so going down, just to hold it nice and smooth like this. And I think for right now I'm only going to pin every other row. I think that that's going to be fine. So every red row of stitches, and on this one, this center basting line also, are going to be quilted. So if I put my pins in between this row, that'll hold these two, and the same with this row, that'll hold these two. That's my plan. Okay, so I have flipped it over, so these are my pins I can see from the back. And my main thing I'm doing right now is to make sure that everything is lying smooth, that there's no big bubbles or gaps or anything between my areas, either from here down or between them and everything. And I think everything looks good. So what I need to do now, I just stabbed myself on a pin. That's not good. But what she wants us to do now is more basting and marking. And so we're right here. It says from the right side, baste over the quilting lines with a short needle and diagonal stitches. And she wants me to use my breakable basting thread. I'm not sure how this needle is going to go through the lining. Yeah, it goes through okay. All right, and she wants you to use this thread because it breaks easily, because you are going to be stitching right over it. So it does need to break easily. So let me just show you on one of these quilting lines what I think she means, and then you don't have to watch me do every single quilting line on both pieces, but just understand this is yet another step that is going to take quite a while. So I'm going to do this one, okay? And I'm going to start at the top and go across. So I just have a little tail hanging out here. Come down at a diagonal. She doesn't say how much. I'm going to say maybe about 1.5 inches, and then come straight across again. So I'm making like these long diagonal lines over my quilt line marks, like that. These marks right here. So let me do a couple more. So like I'm coming down maybe 1.5 inches or so. I'm just going, it's just to hold the fabric layers all together. Just a big diagonal stitch, just like that. Okay, so this is part of one. I'm going to do all of them on both pieces of my skirt. Hello, I am back, and I wanted to mention one more thing. I am going to be pulling out, as I do my diagonal basting stitches over my quilting mark lines, I will be pulling out the dart tracing lines. I don't think those darts are necessary anymore, those dart marks, because of everything else I have going on. But I wanted to point out that I do still have placement marks on here, because this outside edge here, where this little thread that marks where the bottom of my zipper should be, this is my center back. So I have that marked very clearly. Where I have my seam, where I had to take in that little dart, that is my side seam. So I have that mark. Up here in the front, I have this big rectangle where my tummy overlap area is. That marks that as the front, and this line here I am leaving in, even after I quilt right next to it, and that is going to be my center front. And then this marks the edge of my overlap. So I still have all of my markings. It's just the dart stitching lines. I just don't need these anymore. So I'm trying to pull out the basting stitches as I no longer need them, because they just seem to complicate things. So just thought I would point that out. Okay, so this is my back. This is my lining. The cross lines you see, that's the crosshatch marks where I have all of my little horizontal or diagonal basting stitches, okay? Now what I need to do is start sewing these, and they will be done on the machine. So what I need to do is raise this up a bit, starting with one of the rows in the very middle of the skirt. So I will pick this one. I'm going to start sewing up here with probably a fairly wide stitch, like a number 4 stitch, and go straight down and stop, and stop right here at this line. Now, she does not want you to back stitch because we don't want to let these stitches be visible, and back stitching might add a little extra layer that might make it show. So just stop there, leave some tails. We'll pull those in a special way so that they're going to be hidden, that I will show you. But you're just going to do one, bring it back up, do the next one. You know, if you need to roll in the sides so it fits under your sewing machine, do that. So I'm going to go over to my machine and do one, and I will show you what that looks like. Okay, so here we go. I will be back stitching at the very top, up here where my double rows of gathering stitches are. And then I am coming down, and what I am doing is I am running the very edge, inside edge of my presser foot on my red line stitching. And that's going to be putting my quilting stitching like a 1/16 of an inch over. But this will give me the guideline, and it'll still be within my little diagonal basting. But that way I should be able to pull that red stitch out easily. Table wants to jiggle tonight. I don't know why it does that sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to get down to where this basted line is here. And just stop, pull it out, leave a couple really long threads here, and go back up and start again. So let me see what that looks like on the back side. Okay, so this is it on the back side, going straight down. You can see they're fairly long stitches. But that's what she recommended, and I will be pulling these basting stitches out. So on this side, my sewing stitches, they blend in really well because the thread that I'm using blends. So just out of curiosity, I'm going to go ahead and see how difficult it is to pull out these stitches that I have sewn over. Okay, so first is my red basting stitch, and it just comes right out, so that is good. Now my diagonal one, I did put a little knot up here at the top, so I'm going to clip that knot, and let's see if I can just pull them out. I did stitch over it, but remember the whole point of using this kind of yarn is that it's supposed to break easily if I need to. I don't want to yank on it, so I'm going to actually probably end up making some little clips. But it looks like a lot of them, they just slide through, so that's good. So yeah, it looks like it's harder to pull the diagonal ones than it is to pull my straight ones. But you know what, it's doable. And if it's really tough because the stitches are going into it, I'm just going to clip it on both sides and pull it out that way. I think that I would rather do that than yank too hard and risk pulling one of these threads that I sewed unevenly. But just to show you this spot up here where I have pulled the stitches out already, my quilting line, it's pretty much invisible, so I'm happy with that. So it's right there, you know, I can see it here, but it is right there, and so that's lovely. I'm just going to continue. So this is my center of my skirt, and I'm going to do, you know, one at a time, working out one direction, and then come back to the middle and work one at a time going out the other way. All right, so I have all of my red quilting marks taken out, and I have all of the diagonal marks taken out. So I want to tell you about the lessons of what I have learned today. First of all, I have learned that even though this stuff snaps very easily, I will not be using it to baste anything again. And that is because it's so thick that when it's stitched over, it's very easy for those stitches to go right in the middle of it, so you kind of have to clip it anyway to pull it out. So yeah, I will not be using this anymore. What I will be using is, of course, I have my red thread that's ancient, so it's very fragile and it breaks. But I'll probably pull out a different color of equally decrepit thread just so that I have a contrast and use that, you know, because it's old. It's actually the thread that was on the outside of the spool broke very easily, but I've been using so much that I'm at a clean underlayer, and now it's not quite as easy to break, but we'll make it work. But I want to mention that if I was to do this again, and you know, there's a good chance I will do something very similar to this again. I believe what I will do is, if I have tested my heat erasable marker on my fabric and I know that it comes off easily, instead of making those quilting lines with the thread marking, I will draw them on with my heat erasable pen. Because when you're sewing your quilting lines, it's very easy to overrun those. It's very easy to overrun, well, you will overrun your diagonal stitches. And it'll just save a whole lot of time sitting here picking it out. You know, it's not the end of the world, it's doable, but it's just something else that's going to be adding more time before when you're putting the stitches in, those red ones, and when you have to sit here and pick them out. So that's one thing that I would do differently. And so that's two things so far. In this video, this segment, I would, instead of gathering the lining and the front part separately, I would gather them together. And that would mean that when I made my little pleat, I would also be making that little pleat in the lining at the same space. And I think that that is the best way to go with there. But I would also use the heat erasable pen instead of thread marking for the quilting stitches. I just don't see that as a good thing. Okay, so I am just about done here, and I have pulled out my row of marking basting that just was to show where the end of my quilt stitching is supposed to be to. So I've pulled that row out. It's not needed anymore. And I'm going to show you really quick how I am tying off these threads that we just left hanging. Okay, so what I'm doing is opening up my fabric so I can see in between the layers. All right, we'll do this one over here, right here. And I am pulling up so I have access to the bobbin thread and the needle thread. Let's see here. So here's a bobbin and here's my needle thread. So I have them both pulled up. And give them a little tug to make sure I have everything nice and tight. I'm gonna just make a little overhand knot to secure these. And before I tighten it all the way, I'm just going to stick something pokey down kind of where they came out from. And that's going to move the knot down close to it and trim it off. So I end up with my little knot here on the inside. And I can just close it up. And there you go. So I need to go back and do this one right here. But you can see that makes it look really nice and neat. No knots, no nothing exposed, and that's all good. I'll do one more to catch the spot that I missed, which is here. Okay. So I'm pulling out my needle thread and my bobbin thread. Just a little overhand knot. Put my pokey thing through the loop and pull it down, just like that. So that is all done. Okay, so this is what just my plain skirt piece looks like. It seems like a whole lot of work just to get to something that looks so bland, but that is what it is. Now I have held up my little measuring tape to make sure that everything still is in the proper proportion, and at this point it is. So that's good. I'm going to show you the underneath. So this is what it looks like underneath. You can kind of see those quilting stitches there. Now up on the top where I started my quilt stitching, because I did back stitch those, I can just come in and cut all those tails off. All of this up here is going to be encased in the waistband, so it's not really that necessary to do any fancy knots or anything at the top here. And the ends of my gathering stitches, for the ends of all my gathering stitches, I'm doing very similar. I'm just doing a little overhand knot, securing that knot down at the base, and trim them. So I'm just going to do that. All of these threads that are on the inside, I can tie those all at one time together in the same way. Okay? So I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to call this actually a chapter, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.